Welcome to My Wellness Spring, the podcast where we explore conscious living, mindful health, and high vibrational wellness. In this episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by an extraordinary guest, Todd Stream Cameron, who is the founder of True Nature Cuisine and creator of the activated grain method. We'll dive into secrets of nourishing plant-based foods, how it fuels your body, mind, and spirit, and his incredible journey around the world. Stay tuned. This conversation is packed with inspiration, practical wisdom, and a taste of transformation. Welcome, Todd, to Wellness Spring. It's so lovely to have you on the show.
Mm-hmm. Good to be here with you.
So I know you've got a very interesting background, and before we delve into it, could you please tell the listeners where you were born, grew up, and what type of education, so they can get a feel of you?
So you're right back to the beginning, right from the start. So yes. I'm Australian. However, I was actually born and partly raised in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. That's as my family working over there. However, back and forth between Malaysia and primarily Sydney in Australia throughout the growing years. And that gave me a good exposure to multiple cultures. And as we are going to be talking about food, Malaysia is a particularly good place to experience the food of Malaysia, Chinese, and Indian food. Excellent food over there. And then I also had exposure to the Australian culture and all that comes along with that. Yep.
And did you always want to be a chef?
I wouldn't say that. However, from a young age, I did show an interest in food. In my opinion, and it could be argued, however, I was improving on my family's recipes from a young age. At about 5, I think I decided that I could make a better omelette than my mother and started improving it. And in my opinion, within a couple of tries, I'd already exceeded her best omelette yet. Things like that. So there was like this sort of, there was this flow which was always there, orientation towards sort of tactile, engaging with food.
And how old were you then?
That was probably 5 years old. Of course, by the time I was 10, I was already, again, in my own opinion, whipping up masterpieces in minutes. But I could have been a slightly biased opinion.
Like you said, you grew up in Malaysia, so you've got that lovely diversity of creative cooking as well. And what did you do when you left school or university? Did you go straight into becoming a chef?
So upon leaving school, I actually did... I had an interest in food, and I sort of branched for about a year and a half into a pastry chef apprenticeship, which I learnt about as I was going into that. And although I did learn quite a bit and it served its purpose, I realised that it wasn't really for me. I felt a bit limited and stuck. Primarily the having to do the same thing every day. The consistency is key with that sort of thing in a commercial. And so I left that without completing it, and actually spent years traveling. In combination with working, for somebody who's interested in food, travel is excellent. It exposed me to traditional cuisines of different parts of the world, and that has continued, an understanding of traditional cuisines has continued to be a foundation of the food that I create. However, I do usually get creative using the ingredients that traditional cuisines sort of bound within, and then often create sort of what could be called contemporary versions of traditional cuisines. But it's very important to have an understanding of the foundation of the tradition. Travel exposed me to that quite a lot. I should also mention that in the upbringing, I was quite significantly exposed to the world of yoga, as my grandmother and mother were both yoga teachers. So there was actually, and part of that travel had me sort of traveling to countries, sort of seeking a young man out in the world, not so heavily focused on future and career, more working on the foundations of my foundations again I'm mentioning, but this time of myself, working myself, bringing myself into, and so a little bit clumsy there, making myself a person I was happy to be, cleaning up, weeding out the garden of myself, etc., through yoga and meditation for quite a few years. And that's actually in my career life now sort of come around as one branch of things, and then the food has put like a dominant second branch, which then weave together. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And I love yoga and meditation. And when I started many years ago, everybody thought it was a bit hippie and woo-woo. And it's wonderful that your mother and grandmother had yoga, and that would have given you a great standing in life to really get back to who you truly are, you know, because most of us are struggling with fears and doubts and disempowering beliefs, but you know, you would have been in that flow straight away. And I think you went to countries like India. Can you tell us about that?
I did go to India as the sort of classic destination of someone who is the sort of seeker, and India's attracted people with looking at themselves because it's got a long history of that. I quickly realized that not everybody in India was very enlightened at all. And however, it served a purpose. That country has a way of reflecting what you put out back again amidst its challenges. But there's the sort of gems and threads of purity from the past which continue to flow through, and that culture amidst everything else of the world. It's all there.
And yeah, because I'm adjusting cows on the land, I know that in India they consider cows to be very sacred, and I can truly understand why now. And you know, people think, or there are words that India was like the first home to spirituality. So in your travels, which was the most highly evolved place, and do you see food as medicine?
Oh, now getting into the big questions. I don't know about highly evolved place. I did. Well, this could be almost a bit of a joke, but it's an interesting little one that gave me quite a bit of insight. Actually, I was those years ago at a busy temple in South India. It was one of the largest temples in South India, which it was a hot time, I remember, and the temple was actually quite cool with its big stone walls. And it was busy. There was probably a particular auspicious day or something like that. There was crowds of people in front of the different sort of statues of the gods, which were all very symbolic. Those Indian gods, they might be holding this in their hand and that, and they're doing this position. And all those things are quite symbolic of aspects of ourself, largely, or aspects of the cosmos in it. And I was learning about those things. I saw a little crowd in front of one of these holes in the wall, which these things were often. And I did, and I was trying to sort of follow the ways that I'd been shown, and because these structures sort of supposed to lead you from the outer levels of self to the inner self as you go around following a sort of a process. And then I did the little ritual in front of this, what I thought was one of the gods. And next in line on my cycle towards the sort of center. And upon looking up, I realized I'd just done that in front of the toilet door in the temple. And that was actually one of the most profound realizations that I had the whole time I was there, because it dawned on me that this is not about the external at all. It was actually about the process that I was going through inside myself, and whether it was the symbol of some sort of divinity or it was the toilet door made no difference at all. It was one of the biggest realizations, but quite a funny one, actually. So there you go. You ask the question, and you get that sort of obscure answer. As for food as medicine, which was your second, that seems pretty obvious. The quality of the food that we consume, along with environment and mindset, etc., largely becomes the quality of our health and awareness. I feel it's a pretty direct, clear line between the two. Of course, as everything with life, multiple factors influencing. That's the answer to those questions.
Yeah, because Aristotle had that famous quote, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. And as I've been traveling around Australia for 4 years in my camper van, we've noticed the land is very degraded, and that's due for many reasons, and one of them being overuse of chemicals. So where do you source your food? Because I know you do private chefing.
So these days I'm predominantly cooking for retreats, of which the area that I live in, the sort of Byron Bay region in northern New South Wales, I suppose you could call it the retreat capital of Australia. So, and then also private chefing and some events. Generally, people are wanting For me, a sort of creative, wholesome, of course, delicious, but sort of healthy cuisine and quality of ingredients is very important in that. So I'm fortunate around here, and having lived in this area for about 20 years now, I've made connections with multiple food producers. They do come and go a little. It's not easy producing food on a commercial level. Some people burn out or find they can't sustain it, but there's a lot of good quality local food, some of which even drops off the trees around me or on the land that I live on. Right now there's native plums, Davidson plum. They're dropping by the hundreds out of the trees. Every time a parrot flies along, it pushes another 20 out, so then I've been using Davidson plums right now because they're local, they're in season, they're abundant. There's quite a lot of growers, definitely organic, seasonal is a bit of a no-brainer. It's just sort of it's where the quality is, and also it's where the value is. If wanting to eat particularly organically out of season, it can get excessively expensive, but it becomes a sort of seasonal cycle of nutrition because the available produce in its peak is changing regularly throughout the cycle of the year. So I don't stick completely to that, but I let that be the sort of backbone of what I'm creating with. And it's that's where the quality is. The quality is in what's in season locally, generally.
Yeah, well, I've been blessed to meet a lot of scientists and pioneers, and, have connected the dots between chemicals in your food and how it can affect your ill health. And, we're living through a time now where even with children, you mentioned you got 2 lovely children, comorbidities are the highest in history ever, like heart disease, ADDH and other motor neuron diseases and so forth, diabetes. And I really believe food, it's not just something you eat. It's like putting fuel in the car. In Monaco, we used to joke, you put the best fuel into your Ferrari, so why wouldn't you put the best fuel in yourself, to look after your temple, your body. Because you are working on a spiritual level as well, you'd understand about the high vibration in the food. And I'm just curious, whether you bless the food or, if you can tell us more about your land, for example, and those lovely Davidson's plums.
So, a few questions there. So if I answer on the sort of energetics of things and the quality, again, you mentioned. So definitely the quality. I mentioned before this sort of eating seasonally. If you think about humanity throughout history, we would have definitely had a seasonal cycle of nutrition. There would, if you're in a tropical place, for example, the mangoes would have been in season for a couple of months, and at any point in time, a few things would have been available, not the 20, 50, 100 different foods that we've always got available, hundreds of different foods. Now, we probably would have eaten quite a lot of a few things, and then for a period and then not have them again for until the same time next year. And I think actually, so our bodies would have been saturated with certain nutrients at different times of the year, and this sort of yearly cycle of nutrition would become established, and that would then, the body would even anticipate getting a large saturation of particular things at certain times of year. That sort of thing can be a benefit of eating seasonally. As for, you mentioned like blessing the food, that sort of thing, not in a formal way. However, there's a certain stance of just personal self, somewhat sort of stepping back a little and allowing a creative and natural sort of flow to occur. Suppose for me, it's a simple, so food and feeding people in many different forms essentially is quite a nurturing thing. Our original nutrition will come from our mothers, our parents. We feel very nurtured by being fed, and to be feeding. I see it especially in retreat environments when it may be going for a whole week. I or my little team become the source of nutrition, the source of the nurturing sort of energy, and people don't have access to other food while they're in that controlled retreat environment. And I can sort of see the love appearing in people's eyes as they gain confidence in me and realize I'm the source of this nutrition. I see it as something like a service, just a natural, simple being in service, and in that my personal self steps back a little, and I actually enjoy the flow state that comes about when I'm in the kitchen, because it actually feels healthy and beneficial for me. As I'm nurturing others, it comes back around, you know. People, of course, just as the performer on stage, the audience, they put out their performance, and then depending on their audience, the audience could just take that and give nothing back, or they can give then back, and then that will bring out the best of the person performing, and the energy goes around and round. It works like that also with me, whether that's in a small, intimate private chef environment, perhaps doing a 5-course meal for a family, or cooking for a family, as I have a few private chef clients that often live out of the area but come back yearly and bring me in to cook for them. Or in a retreat environment, for example, their appreciation then comes back, and interest, and then it gives me more energy, which I then put back to them, and it's a natural. It becomes a natural flow. Is that an answer?
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer, and you covered a lot there. And yeah, over the years, as a psych nurse and counsellor, I've noticed, food can be a comfort. And as you mentioned, the mother's milk as we're growing up, and that nurturing love, when people are down, some people either avoid food, or they're overeating, or they just comfort eat, depending on your mood. But people also eat with their eyes, because I worked on a boat for a short while, not to your standard, and we had to cook, and my my boss said, just make it look pretty, whatever you do. It doesn't matter what it tastes like as long as it looks pretty. So they devour with their eyes and the aromas, and I'm sure you use beautiful ingredients. So can you tell us about the treats? For example, Katarina Mannheimer Alstrom and I are doing a retreat, and you've kind of accepted to be our chef next February in Sang Surya in Byron Bay, the retreat centre there. So we're doing a deeply spiritual event so people can really connect with their true self. So we believe, when you're doing this, you're detoxing on all levels, mind, body, soul, and spirit. And this is why we chose you as a chef, because we know that you can tune in and provide high vibrational, raw and vegan food and help with that detoxification. So what can we expect?
Well, one of the elements of creating food for a group of people, such as in a retreat environment, is adjusting the menu to best support the group. And that is something that I would talk to you a little bit about beforehand, exactly what you want, but then you'd sort of hand that over to me and would create a menu. It depends. I'd actually want to find a little more information, what sort of energy level outputs you're having when you're there, etc. However, a general safe way is a delicious whole food, plant-based, if that's what you want. Drawing inspiration on different cultures from around the world. So I mentioned briefly earlier, understanding the foundation of a cultural cuisine. The way I would structure an individual meal might be a lunch, for example, it might be, for example, a Middle Eastern style. However, what I often do is limit myself in that meal to the ingredients that would be used in the Middle Eastern diet. Don't use ingredients that come from Southeast Asia or something. Stick within that. However, and with a bit of understanding of traditional cuisine as a foundation, I get creative amidst the limitation of those ingredients and essentially create sort of contemporary. So lunch might be modern Iranian, for example. Or it might, and then a dinner, it might be a traditional Italian, for example, a North Italian, although that does lend well to winter menus, and yours will be in summer, so it might make it a little more Southern Italian. But I would use whole food ingredients instead of potential sort of like white flour based things and sugar based, and I use better quality sweeteners and better quality, and create sort of whole food version of a traditional Italian dinner perhaps. The next day it might be Japanese, it could be a soba noodle salad with radishes, but it depends what I had access to. That sort of thing. Sweet treats, if you like them, can definitely be brought out and created. Again, actually substituting ingredients which are less health enhancing would be three of the main ones. Could be like oil. There would only be cold pressed oils, often added towards the end, so they're not heated. or sweeteners. Instead of using highly processed sugars, instead would use natural, minimally processed sugars, natural sweeteners, that sort of thing. A whole food approach to cooking. That's a little outline of what you might expect.
That's wonderful. And I know you offer a chef in cooking class. What would that entail?
In a retreat environment, do you mean, or outside that?
Yeah.
So in a retreat environment. Include cooking classes or classes. Yep, that's something which I often include. It, as you mentioned, that food and understanding of food, it's an important aspect of life. It amazes me sometimes. It's an excellent life skill to be able to prepare food well, to nurture those around us, nurture ourselves. It amazes me sometimes how people manage to get so far through life having a very minimal capabilities to feed themselves or others. So that could be somewhat up to you and the group. If it was a few days in, I could actually get to know you a little and take some requests, or possibly, just teaching whole food recipes, either things that you had eaten on the retreat. We could theme it around whole food, healthy desserts. It could be finger foods. It could just be a general sort of nutrition and whole food class. I could, of course, as I have developed an optimal nutrition method around grains, breads, cakes, baking, called the activated grain method. You'd be strategically positioned for me to teach you a little about that, seeing as you'd be there with me who has sort of founded and developed that method. So it could be an activated grain method class or a combination of multiple.
Yes, can we delve in that? Because I've just purchased your book, as you know, The Activated Grain Method. And there's so many people out there with gluten intolerance. So how is that going to help them?
Well, if somebody is gluten intolerant, then the activated grain method can definitely, it actually is easiest with gluten-free grains. However, all grains could be used. And I could go into and explain a little about the method, because activated grain method, it sounds a bit mysterious. What's this activated all about? A lot of people have heard of activated nuts, as they're available in health food stores, that sort of thing, in packets. They're crunchy and delicious, and might have a minimal understanding of that. But what's the activated all about? Really, it's a little bit mysterious. Would you like me to go into and talk about that a little more?
Absolutely, that would be wonderful, because not many people out there understand the process behind it. And even just, when you grow your own sprouts and different things like that, people don't, or you soak grains overnight, people can't understand the reasoning behind it. So if you can please explain, who or what inspired you to write your book about the activated grain method, and how we as layperson can open it into our daily living.
Yes, I can definitely do that. So there's there's an explanation that I can go into, which will sort of start at the basically the definition of a grain, and quickly wrap around into two different scenarios, taking a grain or combination mixture of grains, and painting two different scenarios: the activated way or the traditional way, which might be grinding those to flour and using those to make the breads and etc. It's about a 10-minute sort of explanation, and if I go into that, if you've got the time for that, I'll keep it quite to the point. Then a good understanding could come about of the two different ways and the benefits and compromises in both of them. Would you like me to go into that?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So now bear with me as I start, and I'll be talking about you. You're going to roll your eyes and you're going to think, oh God, what have we gotten into here? But don't worry, it moves quickly. I paint the picture and explanation of the structure of the grain because it's actually important to have a clear understanding of that as the beginning, and then you'll quickly see why as I progress. So bear with me and don't tune out here for the first moment. So essentially, grains are the seeds of the parent plant, and every seed needs to have a certain amount of stored energy. Nuts, which are also seeds, they generally store their energy in the form of oils and fats, and grains store their energy in the form of carbohydrate. Seeds need to have a certain amount of stored energy so that when they begin to grow, they need to have enough energy to get that first leaf out of the soil and roots in. From there, they start harvesting energy from the surrounding environment. And it's because of the stored energy which grains, nuts, seeds have that we use them for human nutrition, because we can get energy from them. However, the way we treat them largely determines whether they are health enhancing or, to the opposite extreme, quite compromising to human health. And I'm going to, in regards to grains, point out two different scenarios so you can see the difference between them. So the composition of a grain is the germ, the DNA, often with vitamin E rich, makes up a tiny part, about 1 to 3% of the weight of the grain. However, a very important part. It's the part which turns the rest of the seed into that plant. The majority is stored energy with grains in the form of a complex carbohydrate, makes up about 95, 97%. And then there's the bran, the fibrous coating on the outside. Now, the two different scenarios. And this is where you'll get an understanding about the activation. If I take that grain and grind that perfect little package and grind it to a powder, flour, there's a few things which occur. Firstly, there's a certain amount of heat generated in the grinding, which contributes to compromised nutrition, particularly in the DNA, the vitamin E, which is very susceptible to oxygen. But also you take that little package and the air is exposed to oxygen and air, And over time, because the flowers often sit for extended periods of time, the nutrition in that becomes quite compromised, rancidity, etc., and just a general degrading of what's present. There's also another factor which is in all grains and legumes. It's called phytic acid, form of unstable phosphorus that binds mostly to minerals and makes it harder to digest them. Possibly, speculatively, nature's insect deterrent or something like that for the seed. So that in the ground form, the phytic acid is present. So now I'm going to paint a different scenario. The grain, instead of being ground to a flour, is soaked in water. This is where the activation process begins. After about 6 hours, that grain has absorbed all the water it's going to, and it quickly starts to convert the complex carbohydrate. Complex carbohydrates are that energy in a dormant sort of storage mode. Complex carbohydrates, if we consume them, have to be digested. It takes work to break those down into simpler forms. Now, in the case of soaking the seed, the grain, that complex carbohydrate, that grain, we can't use it in a complex form. We have to convert it to simpler forms in digestion. The grain also needs to can't use it in the complex form. It has to convert it into simpler forms. So it starts to rapidly convert the complex carbohydrate into simpler forms. It makes the stored nutrients within the grain bioavailable. It intends to use them for itself. However, if we're using it for human nutrition, then it's essentially unlocking the stored nutrients and converting the complex into the simple. And also the DNA, which was previously in the grain in a dry state, goes from dormant into active state. That is largely the process of activation. The grain in this case activates into pre-growth stage. It goes from dry, dormant stage into pre-growth, but is yet to start sprouting, in which upon the sprouting process, although nutrients can continue to evolve and develop, then the grain starts to become more juicy plant matter, and the results when turning those into breads, it starts to change dramatically, and a lot less resemble your classic loaf of bread or something like that. But in the activated stage, you can achieve results which are very similar. So is that a little bit much? Are you having trouble now? Is that a lot of information? I'll continue. I'm not quite done.
No, please continue.
I'll continue a little now. How to use the grains, how to apply. So then you think, which one will I choose? Will I choose the soaked, activated grain with its optimized nutrition, or will I choose the grain which has been ground to a flour, which is with its somewhat compromised nutrition that results from the treatment? So you think, well, I'll choose the optimized one. Why not? Of course, I'll choose the one which is the optimized nutrition. But then the question is, so how can I turn that soaked grain into bread? How can I turn it into cakes? How can I turn it into pancakes? How can I turn it into the foods that I would usually turn flour into? Well, I'm glad you asked, Beverley, because the answer... So first, a few things. Instead of using a single grain, use the gluten-free. I'll start to get a little specific now, and that understanding will fill in. Why not make a combination of grains and even add some nuts and seeds in the mix, some legumes too, to diversify the nutritional profile. So, for example, that grain that we've been talking about could be a grain of brown rice. But why not add some quinoa, maybe some buckwheat, a little dash of millet, which is very high in silica and has alkalizing effect on the body. Why not then add some French green lentils to the mix too? If you know anything about whole food nutrition, you realise that when combining whole grains and legumes together, you get a complete protein. All of the essential amino acids that are often found in animal products come together when combining whole grains and legumes. Traditional diets of people around the world, the Indians with their dals and rice, in the Middle East their whole wheat breads with their chickpeas and etc. In South America with their beans and maize, etc. Those cultures have lived predominantly vegetarian for thousands of years with this combination of the whole grains and legumes. So why not diversify the nutritional profile? But then you still think, okay, I still haven't got a clue how to do anything with this. So, and that soaking, that sounds a bit difficult. I don't know if it's me. It could all sounds a bit like drawn out, and how can I work around that? So a little bit about soaking. And within a few minutes, bear with me here, within a few minutes we're coming around and you'll have a pretty clear understanding about how it all works. So the soaking, if you think about soaking food, it's probably the most ancient and simplest food preparation method there is. Australian Aboriginal cultures have been soaking foods to make them more edible, etc. It's been going forever, and it's extremely simple. In this case, you would create a combination of grains and legumes, place them into a container that a lid would fit on, and have the nice enjoyment of mixing them through your fingers. Tune in, it could be a little meditation, the sort of tactileness of the grains. They always feel nice, I enjoy that part. And then cover them with water. That will take a grand total of about a minute and a half, unless of course you get right into the mixing of the grains and you take a few extra minutes to do that, but that's another thing. Minute and a half. And then the trick with soaking, the optimal time period for activation of the grains is 12 hours, which is perfect. The 6 hours for absorption, and then the next 6 hours, that process of converting the complex carbohydrates, making the nutrients bioavailable, that pre-growth activation occurs over about the next 6 hours or so. So it becomes extremely simple. If you soak a grain mix in the evening, that would be then covered with water and left on your kitchen bench at room temperature overnight. That would then be ready by the morning, or if you did that in the morning, that could sit throughout the day and would be ready in the evening. Most of us are home in the morning and the evening, and that grain mix could then either be used straight away, or it could be placed in the fridge in the soaking water for up to about a week, making it very convenient. So actually, if the soaking is a bit of a put-off, you're starting to see it could be, you've invested thus far to create your activated grain mixture. you've probably invested until now about 2 minutes of your time and energy with the soaking period of a night or a day in between. Let's say that's been popped in the fridge because, of course, you planned on making that chocolate cake or that evening because some family was coming over and you knew, I'm making this up now, and you knew one of them was a celiac or gluten-free, or and you were going to show off with your new activated grain cakes, but then of course they cancelled because something happened. So you popped it in the fridge, but then now you've decided you are going to use it the next day. Anyway, so now we'll get down to actually using this grain mix and how to use this combination of activated grains and legumes to create, well, let's say, pancakes. It's one of the simplest. Whereas with flour, the ground grains in the flour form would go into a bowl, and for pancakes would add a milk of your choice, dairy or non-dairy, eggs if you wanted, or they could be left out, a pinch of salt, and that would be made to a batter with the flour mix. Instead, we are turning towards a blender instead of a bowl. These activated grain combinations will get blended to a batter, so the grain mix could be strained out of the soaking water and placed into a blender, and those same ingredients would be added to it. Milk of your choice, the pinch of salt, the eggs if you want it, or they could be left out, and then that would be blended. About 30 seconds in the blender will create 30 to 40 seconds, a smooth batter looking very identical to a pancake batter, which could then be poured straight into the pan from the blender or stored. However, you start to see, however, instead of those pancakes being made of, even if that was an organic spelt flour that's been ground and may have sat around for at least a couple of months, even if it was less than that, compromised nutrition, suddenly these pancakes are made out of nutritionally optimized, activated, for example, could be brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat, and green lentils, for example. And they are the nutritional profile in the activated grain pancake compared to the standard one, they're quite a world apart. However, the method has been simple, and the result in the end result of the actual pancake can be made very similar to the flour one. Another example, bread, for example. If you may be a sort of do-it-yourself type person at home, enjoys creating ferments, maybe been reading some magazines or looking online, maybe you've seen a naturopath and they've told you the benefits of fermentation, etc. You're looking to increase your levels of health and well-being, taking it into your own hands a little more, then creating things at home are almost always superior to commercial shop versions of them. And an activated grain bread, for example, so now you've got that grain mix, which would be in the fridge or freshly soaked. Again, those grains would be, the water would be drained away and the grains added to the blender. But this time, if you're going to make a sourdough, gluten-free activated grain sourdough loaf of bread, just pure water would be added to those grains to about the level of the top of the grains. The water would fill in the gaps between the grains in the blender. A quick blend of about 30 seconds will achieve a batter consistency, which would then be poured out and sat in a clean container again on the bench, which would then, depending on temperature, take about 24 hours to ferment into a sourdough. I could talk a little more about sourdough if you're interested, but I'll continue on without going into that. Or a raising agent, such as a natural baking powder, could be added to that grain mixture, which would then allow you to bake that loaf instantly because it would rise. In my opinion, the sourdough is you're really harnessing superfood breads then. You've got a gluten-free, activated loaf of bread with complete protein, diversified nutrition, easy to digest, and then the fermentation improves the flavour and the nutrition even further on that. And it's particularly easy with activated grains. And I could talk about that a little more if you're interested. I'll paint one more scenario. The cake, for example. Traditionally, perhaps the cake might be made out of flour. Let's say it's a chocolate cake. Flour, you might then add cocoa or cacao powder, a sweetener of your choice, a milk of your choice, eggs if you want it, or you can leave them out, and make that to a batter. If it was the flour version of the cake, and then some raising agent to make it fluffy, and then of course an oil of your choice. That could be an oil or butter, etc. Those would essentially basic ingredients for chocolate cake if you're using flour. Now the activated version, again, instead of going flour into the bowl, you're going your activated grain mixture into the blender, and those same ingredients get added to that. The milk, the oil, the sweetener of your choice, a little vanilla, a pinch of salt, the cacao powder. That would, again, blend quickly into a batter, which could then be, or would resemble very closely your flour cake batter, which would then get poured into a cake tin and baked, and out would come your chocolate cake, which would not be your sort of real whole food sort of cake consistency. Actually would be fluffy, sweet as you wanted it to be, delicious, however, also gluten-free and nutritionally optimized. And the methods there, you can see it's a very simple, the methods are very simple. And actually, if you're time poor, if you're living a cosmopolitan lifestyle, if you're out the door each day, working and coming home tired, surprisingly, having had feedback from many thousands of people who are out there creating activated grain recipes, predominantly in Australia. However, it has gone internationally also. I have found international sort of exposure of the method a little tricky and hasn't been, it's taken off in Australia particularly. People get back to me, and it's often busy people who are using the method. Someone who possibly lives alone, coming in, wanting a healthy, nutritious meal. People tell me again and again they tend to live off the pancakes or pan breads because with an activated grain method in the fridge, it takes literally a minute until you're pouring that pan bread or pancake into the pan, another couple of minutes to cook, which could then have your filling or topping of choice. Could be made into a wrap style, could be filled with avocados and your fermented vegetables and your leaves and whatever you wanted to put in there. But the foundation, compared to taking a shop or wrap, for example, out of the fridge or cupboard and using that, there's like it's so much more giving of nutrients, but it's been very easy to achieve. And then, of course, families use the method a lot. More and more people have been recommended that they, different problems, arthritis, or myriads of different problems, reduce or remove gluten from the diet. Actually, people who have been on grain-free diets for different reasons also have given me excellent feedback, because it's the way you treat the ingredients, which is the difference between them being health-enhancing. Bread could be that staff of life, once again. Staff of life meaning the staple food. With modern day breads, if you try and make bread that staple, generally there's a slow but steady decline in optimal sort of health, because the quality of the breads are somewhat compromised. So I've talked quite a lot about the activated grain method. Has that given you a fairly clear idea? Do you have any questions about that?
No, you covered everything perfectly, especially covering people who are time poor, because that's their main complaint, that they don't have time to do it. And I think it's great that you can leave the mixture longer than one day or a few hours and use it for multiple different things. And the nutritional value, and a lot of, like, I went through a period where I didn't eat bread for years because they said I was gluten intolerant, and I absolutely love bread. So lots of
everybody loves bread.
Yeah, yeah. So
it's a real comfort food.
It is a real comfort food. And my mother used to cook bread. You know, we had everything, we grew everything, so we ate with the seasons, which was the traditional method that you talked about, eating food that are seasonal. And comfort food, we'd get up and I could smell the bread. She had to stop making it before we were going to school, because we'd wake up and we were all fighting. We'd rip the whole crust off the bread and so forth. You know, we just loved the hot bread, you know. Anyhow, I think that was great what you covered, and I know in your book you've got a good explanation about it as well, which people can buy from your website or Amazon and other places. I just wanted to ask you a few quick questions, like looking ahead. What feels like the next evolution for you personally, professionally, and the consciousness of cuisine?
So, personally, I feel quite happy with the balance that I have in my life now. Between work and I do have a small family, 2 children, 13 years old and 9 years old. And I like, obviously with all of us, we all know about dividing ourselves between the different elements of life. And it's a balancing act. Oftentimes, our professional lives can be quite dominant, and there's times to put a lot into our professional lives. That aspect of our lives gives back to us a lot, and it's a excellent way contributing to society. And however, I seek balance in my life. That balance isn't always in an everyday. Sometimes that balance comes after a very busy month, and it comes in some rest and relaxation. It comes in different forms without working. Yes, so personally, right now, I feel quite content with the offerings that I'm putting out into the world of food in creating food for retreats, events, and private chefing, and also teach a little of the activated grain method and also cooking classes. And the other one you said was that asked about the evolution of food.
Yeah.
Consciousness in food.
The future of conscious food, conscious eating.
That's a bit of a bigger question. So the future of conscious eating, oftentimes in individuals' lives, some catalyst arises for change. That could be little crises, individual sort of crisis. It could be health issues. It could actually even be as simple as a holiday, which gives us time to walk down long empty beaches and filters back to a little more self-awareness. It could be a small cleanse or a fast, which gives a little extra awareness, that we want to up our game with health. Perspective can come in many different ways. Something like a little cleanse can give us a glimpse of us feeling healthier and better, our brains functioning clearly, and our energy levels high. That then makes individuals go, I want more of this, and then start turning towards how they can achieve that. There comes the life balance, but even in times of high demand, work with family, difficult or stressful times, they come and go through everybody's lives. Different things that have been somewhat out of our control, etc., which become difficult times. If the foundation of health and well-being is fairly high, then it works. Whether that's come through a health thing, people who see naturopaths, that is a classic one, because unlike doctors who will tend to focus primarily on the problem, the naturopath will look at more of a holistic sort of self. They talk about diet and lifestyle and sleep and the whole spectrum, and often give recommendations to adjust diet, etc. Whatever these catalysts are, actually experiencing the benefits of adjustments to food and diet then becomes a reference point, which often starts to make it not a discipline anymore. And we just want to eat well. We want to eat locally because we realise that that bag of lettuce greens that we bought from the farmer's market just felt so much more vital than the one that comes from the supermarket or something like that. So then it becomes no longer a discipline. It starts to just become what you naturally want to do. And then you realize that actually that handful of freshly picked greens from your own garden feels even more vital than the ones you got at the farmer's market, which are better than the ones from the supermarket. And then life, we start to prioritize different elements of life, and then we might decide, let's start small, garden and just grow the herbs and a few fresh things which come straight to the plate. And then it sort of goes like that. But there can be, with diet and a transitioning from a less health-enhancing diet to a more health-enhancing diet, there can often be a bit of discipline involved, but then that discipline quickly turns into something which is no longer a discipline because you start to realise the benefits. Of course, a good old feast or a party now and then has its place. And personally, I find a sort of 70% rule for myself. I was someone in the past was quite extreme with, I'd go 100% into different things. And I learned a lot through doing that. I learned all about that I was diving into, different dietary systems, whether it was Ayurvedic or macrobiotic or raw food, etc. But I came to realize that about the 70%, whatever we're doing 70%-ish of the time, makes or breaks our level of health. And there can be times to push that 70 to 80 or even 90%. And there can also be those times to relax a little more and it goes down to 60 or 50. But personally, I find if the quality is getting down to even about 50, there starts to come in a compromise that I'm not happy with. I like the levels of health and clarity, energy that I have when the percentages of quality foods, rest, balance, etc., is a little higher, around the 70 mark. And sort of conscious evolution of that. I think the energy that we're in when we do things, it becomes, it transfers into what we do. In cooking and food, as I said before, it's a nurturing thing, whether we're nurturing ourselves, caring enough for ourselves to give ourselves the goods, make the little efforts that it takes to give ourselves, or if we're nurturing and nourishing others, then just that sort of attitude of care that goes into it, I think, because around food, is just the right sort of, it's not too heady, it's just natural, it's hearty, it's loving. If you think about love is really a sort of care for ourselves or others. And then, of course, if we think also about the bigger picture, food miles and organic farming is generally not only good for our bodies, nutrient levels, lack of chemicals, but also good for the ground which it's been grown on. It tends to improve over time the quality of the soil rather than deplete. Just as the quality ingredients improves the quality of our bodies over time rather than deplete, then that sort of conscious awareness starts to sort of pervade through it. But it's all very simple and natural when it comes to food. There you go.
Speaking my language, yeah, and I totally agree with everything you said, especially grow your own. And even if you're in an apartment, you can still grow herbs on the windowsill, for example. Can you tell us about the celebrities you've worked with? I know you've worked in Australia with Olivia Newton-John and her award-winning Gaia Retreat. What was that experience like?
Yep, I can talk about that. So when Gaia Retreat first opened, I came on board actually before it opened. I came on board as the head chef before they opened their doors, and I set the kitchen up there. It was a project that Olivia, it was one of her Passions and Dreams to open a sort of upmarket sort of holistic retreat venue like Gaia Retreat. And she came on board with a collection of friends and others who all played their part in the role. And it was very in alignment with myself. I set the kitchen up there in a way that at the time nobody else was doing set menus. By that I actually mean no menu. There was no menu. The menu was decided by a chef each day, depending on the guests that were in-house, which I had information on. They had given information about dietary needs, etc., and also availability of premium ingredients. It helped very much that there was a large organic garden, steps from the back door of the kitchen, and so by creating a no menu environment, there was initially amidst the management there some uncertainties because they looked to other places and nobody was doing that. However, I sort of dug in and asked them to let me run with this for a while and see how it goes. And it was extremely well received. It made people feel somewhat at home. They would come to the table and the waiter or waitress would tell them what that meal was that day. And you could sort of relax and receive, and it all went very well. Of course, then in time, other places started opening and following suit. It worked as far as freshness of ingredients, picking the prime of what was available in season and just using that. Also, the other chefs which were employed there, I encouraged them to get creative and show their own sort of flair. It allowed us in the kitchen as chefs to really be chefs, to have ideas, to develop those ideas, and create many sort of signature dishes along the way, which we would develop over a number of weeks to months and then would run with for a period, and then often move on as new things came up. It was a good working environment for me because I was like the artist in the studio. The fact of having no menu meant there was almost no wastage, which meant the budget stretched a lot further. So really I had budget and means to do whatever I wanted over that time, which kept me entertained and interested and helped me develop as a chef quite well. And Gaia Retreat was very supportive of that. And as they realised that it was going well, then that and they're still running in that same way now. I still know the chefs who are working there, and for some time, even after I left, which was after 5 years. I would continue to go back now and then and cook a dinner there just to help them out here and there, and I enjoyed that. I don't do that anymore, but I'm still connected, and they're doing excellent food there, which is still continuing on in that no menu sort of theme. As for Olivia, she was a lovely person. She, as somebody who is a household name, it's in Australia and even internationally, she hadn't let that ruin her. If anything, I think she just harnessed that and it let it enhance her. She kept real. She was always very personal and warm. When she would come through, she wasn't there all the time. She would come and go 2, 3, maybe 4 times in a year. She, as you probably know, even as she matured, she kept very active in the world, at charities and etc. At one point, for her 60th birthday, she came with a lot of her friends and family, flew in from all over the world for a Bollywood-themed dinner and party at Gaia Retreat, which I cooked for. It was quite a do, you know. All of them dressed in saris and turbans and things like that, with the Bollywood theme, and out on the hillside under tents and then all sorts of dancing and things like that. That was a nice event that she came to Gaia Retreat for, the 60th birthday. But generally, she was a lovely person.
Thank you for sharing that. I've got a friend, Phil Sanders, who tunes pianos, and he's met her, and I was blessed to go backstage and meet her briefly as well. And she was so humble and welcoming with everybody. What is your number one health go-to?
Now that's a hard one for me, because I don't really do number ones. I'm not. If you ask me what my favourite is you won't get a clear answer. Instead, I'll start rambling on about this. The differences of everything, they all have different qualities, and I find it difficult to compare them. Therefore, I can't really choose a number one. And so I don't really have favourites and number ones. I appreciate variety. However, saying that, for the last couple of months at home, if I'm at home in the mornings, then the green smoothie has been evolving to a real next level of a green smoothie. It generally is a combination of fresh or frozen fruits. So the one this morning was frozen jackfruit, banana, and passion fruit, with a big combination of fresh greens and herbs from the garden, including an incredible mint, which is growing and abundant right now, which makes it so fresh and minty, which in combination, and then a squeeze of fresh lime juice over the top, the fruity, and then make it quite rich, not too much water added, becomes smooth. It just feels like an elixir of good health, with the fruity tropical fruit sort of, and then all the fresh greens with a strong mintiness, and then fresh lime juice on top. It just leaves me sort of zinging, and enough to want to just go to it every morning. Might think, I might have a coffee this morning, but then after that green smoothie, actually it feels less appealing, because it's just zinging with like natural sugars and nutrients. So a green smoothie is one of the faves for now.
Wonderful. And if there was one thing you could do to make our world a better place, what would it be?
Well, you have the big questions. So I really feel like foundations within ourselves our level of awareness, our level of connection to ourself projects out and becomes so much of what is the man-made, or the human world, our cultures. So it would be, I'd say, improvements on. I was thinking about this just recently, a few days ago, actually. Having a discussion about a lot of what we call our leaders in the world seem grossly underqualified for the leadership roles. In my opinion, it seems largely because of that sort of there's not a lot of, doesn't seem to be a strong undercurrent of wisdom and connection in these people. And actually, so it would probably be an education incorporating the importance of meditation or practices which led to a comfortable self-awareness and grew into sort of wisdom that could then permeate through society as the normal. And in this conversations we had of the leaders, it would seem only natural that maybe in a future more sort of enlightened society that someone would not be qualified or able to be in a position of lead as a leader unless they had demonstrated that they had a certain developed at least a quite strong foundation of wisdom and self-awareness. They would be unfit to be in a position of making decisions that affected the many unless they unless they demonstrated that those were. So you see the sort of chain of thought there. So then. Yeah. But then perhaps in education, the importance placed on that and time and energy given to the development of that in the many individuals, I'd say could become a new normal of levels of sort of awareness and which would then project out into things which were harmful to ourselves or harmful to the environment or others being considered unacceptable in our society. Whereas right now, things that are harmful, well, as long as somebody's profiting off those, then, well, they can just put their little spiels and this and that and do the little jiggles and wiggles and make it all seem quite acceptable, even though it's, for example, I see us, with a good foundation of morals and awareness, then I see that as the way forward for us as humanity.
I'm sure many conscious, compassionate, kind, caring people will resonate with what you've just said. And it's about getting that message out there. And talking about how messages, I'd like to share that people can reach out to you on the True Nature Cuisine. Do you want to quickly say about your website and why you founded this True Nature Cuisine?
Yeah, so True Nature Cuisine is the catering, I suppose you would call it, catering business, which I am currently functioning within, and it is largely revolves around myself. However, I do have a small team, which sometimes expands out to a bigger team for larger events. And that predominantly in the Byron Bay region of northern New South Wales in Australia. We function in this region. I'm not currently doing many public events, more bookings for private events, retreats, as I mentioned. people bring their yoga retreats from all corners of Australia and the world to Byron Bay. There are many different forms of retreats, meditation retreats, self-work sort of retreats that take so many different shapes and forms. So supporting those as in alignment, very much in alignment with other, with True Nature Cuisine, and then private chef and events. And then, of course, the other website, the Activated Grain Method, which so I talked about the activated grain method. However, actually, you're sort of left dangling at a bit of a loose end without actual recipes. When it comes to recipes, if you think you're interested in those, then really the best way to start incorporating activated grain recipes into your repertoire, your life, and your diet is to get the cookbook, which is available posted Australia-wide or as an ebook internationally or Australia-wide. Then you have access to it's the reference. It teaches the method and gives many grain combination examples and many recipes that use the activated grain method. Well, generally, it's really designed to teach the method and then become a reference book that you would tap into now and then, having become comfortable with and confident in those. You can just sort of take it away yourself. Once we have understanding, then we can just create amidst that. So there's the activated grain method website and True Nature Cuisine. I'm not, I have to admit, extremely active on social media. There is True Nature Cuisine Instagram account, which you may have to wait extended periods of time for much from me on that. However, I do continue to. I actually treat it more like a gallery of images which you could look at and see and get an idea from, rather than a constant engaging. It's more of a gallery.
That's wonderful. So I'd like to say thank you so much for giving up your precious time and sharing your amazing words of wisdom. And keep shining. And I look forward to reading the book fully and trying your methods. Thank you.
Thank you very much.